Not give the game away, David. Nice to see you. Thank you very much.
Good morning to you.
How's life with you as a local MP at the moment?
Oh, busy. I mean, there are just so many things happening. Well, I will say what I said when I came in, which is I wish the government would stop cocking things up.
what have they been cocking up then?
Well,
what are you unhappy with?
Well, this week it were the two principal problems. One was the healthcare data, which I think they made a mess of, and we can get right, but it's going to take us time. And the other thing is the Irish issue. The chap who was effectively let off a trial for a very, very serious murder. We don't know whether he was guilty or not, but we know
the Hyde Park.
Yeah, but we didn't. He didn't have a proper trial.
What do you feel about that? Because I'm fascinated by it. We were sort of discussing it on the programme yesterday, and I suspect it was one of those subjects with maybe too big for some people to get their heads round. Where do you stand on this? Having been, I think, on an IRA death list.
That's right. And actually, I gave evidence. I think in one of the last, if not the last, trial of an IRA targeter. And the irony of it was, we gave this evidence, a huge amount of it, big trial. I got cross-examined by the Sinn Féin QC, or whatever you call him, and at the end of it, the guy was found guilty and then instantly released, because that's what the Good Friday Agreement said. You can't actually imprison these people. Now, I think that the real problem in all of this was that Parliament didn't give approval to the government and it refused to give approval, actually, to the government to, as it were, give amnesties to people. And there must still be a suspicion around this, that this is a sort of an amnesty by a back door, like telling people, well, you don't come to Britain because you'll get arrested, is what these letters amount to, really. And there'll be a lot of victims who really feel very, very sore about that. And frankly, I'm with them. I think that's reasonable. If they were going to do it, and after all, this has happened elsewhere. It's happened in other ends of sort of civil wars in South Africa, the most obvious case. You're going to have a truth and reconciliation process. You do it above board. You come to Parliament, you say we're going to need these exemptions and so on, and everybody accepts it. This was it wasn't secret, but it wasn't actually brought to Parliament to be decided.
How dangerous is what's going on at the moment to the peace process? Is there danger in this?
I don't think so. I think it will settle down, to be honest. And I don't think anybody's going to reverse anything that's happened now.
Right.
That's the truth of the matter. Because Northern Ireland's still unstable. I mean, one of the things that I was involved in was trying to shut down the sort of criminal base of the IRA and the other paramilitaries, because they made about $5 million a year out of everything from smuggling to selling black videos to drugs, to the animal drugs rather than human drugs, to fraudulent companies. I mean, and we shut a lot of that down, but still a lot of it's still there, and so there's still a sort of criminal enterprise, as it were, there, and I suspect that feeds the real IRA, the continuity IRA, and so on. Which so it's always got a hint of instability, but I think broadly speaking, the Northern Irish people absolutely want peace. They want to stick with this. They've made the compromises, but what we should try and do is make sure that the victims or the relatives of the victims are not put through misery as they must have been this week.
Just to check, you're not still on the death list, are you? In which case, I'll pull the blinds down in the studio.
No. I think not with them anyway. Maybe with the government, but not with them.
What is that? Because you are an ex-soldier. You served in the SAS. What does that feel like to be on a death list?
It's less dramatic than you think. I mean, bear in mind it's a big death list. You're not the only one. If there's a list of one, you might worry more. But it means you just got to be careful. You've got to check under your car. You've got to not make it easy, really. And if you don't make it easy, they give up. They don't try. But you shouldn't let it. It's not the sort of thing you should let obsess you.
David Davis is our guest this morning in the hot seat, so do feel free to get your questions in. He's the MP for Halton Price and Howden. He ran for leadership of the Conservative Party against David Cameron, correct me if I'm wrong, and it was very close at one point. Is that a source of regret for you, that you weren't leader of the party? You didn't become Prime Minister?
No, when I used to rock climb, and one of the things about rock climbing is don't look down, or don't look back, and the same's true with this. If you there's an old adage, an American adage, which is there's no shame in getting knocked down. The shame is not getting up again, and that's what you do. You get up and you get on with the next thing. And the truth of the matter is, I have a fantastic time as a Member of Parliament. I'm really lucky. People listen to what I say. I can change things from time to time. That's actually, something to be grateful for.
Let's get into it. Glyn Parry, who describes himself as a Cleethorpes working man on a low wage. Local councils face massive cuts looking at this. We see Labour councils hit the hardest and other councils, very much less Labour-controlled council cuts, losing less. Wokingham, one of the richest areas in England, will get a 1.1% rise, and Surrey Heath will receive a 0.9% increase in funding, while Liverpool will lose 27.1% in funding. In Hull, they're losing 48 million quid. Epsom and Ewell will enjoy a 3% increase. Question... the Conservative councils seem to be getting rises. Question is, are we really all in this together? Says Glyn Parry, Cleethorpes working man on low wage. It does seem iniquitous. What would you say to Glyn?
Well,
and
I
other
mean,
people
first thing to say, I mean, I'm not familiar with the numbers for Wokingham, but I can tell you the local numbers. And right enough, I mean, Hull have had a significant cutback. But let's start from the real facts. We are still, even today, after 3 years of austerity, we are still having to borrow £1 in every 6 the government spends, and that's the taxpayers' money, and there's no way we can raise more money. No government's ever raised more than about 40% of the national income, as it were. So we can't get any more money, and as a result, we have to cut back. We have to make things fit. Otherwise, we're passing on debts to our children. Now, in terms of fairness between councils, well, I can talk to the local ones because I know my East Yorkshire Council. Yeah. They, over the course of 5 years, having about 36% cuts, but they started planning for it quite a long time ago. And, all right, you can play the numbers game, I agree, and there will be some feelings of unfairness, and invariably there's rough justice and this sort of thing. But Hull had much higher per capita receipts from government than East Riding did. East Riding was £100 below the sort of average for its sort of council, and yet it saw cuts too. So it's tough, it's difficult. I make no bones about that, but I also make no bones about the fact it's necessary. Now,
but are the Conservative councils being favoured? Which is what I think Glyn in Cleethorpes.
East Yorkshire's a Conservative council, and it's not being favoured. It's say 36% over the course of 4 or 5 years, I think, is the cuts for them, starting from a low base. Now, there are reasons for that. I mean, Hull is a poorer area on average,
and needs support,
and needs more support. So you won't find me saying, you've got to put Hull on the same basis as East Riding. But you also got to understand it starts from a higher level in terms of total income from the government than East Riding did, and East Riding is in the worst 40 in the country in terms of spending. So you can't really represent this as Tory versus Labour in that sense. And as I say, there is also there's a proper imperative on councils to plan to cut their cloth to fit what they've got. I remember talking to Steve Parnaby, the head of East Yorkshire Council, some years ago. I said, how are you going to cope with this? Because we could see it coming. This is not new. This is hardly a surprise. And he said, well, we are making plans and we think we can cope with it, and we think we can cope with it without putting council tax up, and that's broadly what they've done. Done a pretty good job, actually. So it's not just Tory. There are other parts of the formula which we don't all necessarily understand, including me, which is partly to do with valuations and all that sort of stuff, which I still think to this day slightly favours the south over the north, and that might actually be a bigger issue, and that's one at some point, when I get through all the other things, I'm going to have a look at. But that's I would worry more about that than left-right division as north-south division.
David Davis is our guest, the MP for Halton, Price and Howden this morning. If you want to talk to him, you can... this is how you do it. These are the numbers.
Be part of the David Burns Show. Text 81333 and start your message with RH. Call Hull 225 959. Grimsby 340 959. Email burnsy@bbc.co.uk or tweet the programme at BBC Burnsy.
This is the David Burns Show.
Neil Hopper says, huge respect to David Davis as a politician. As a Labour follower, I've always felt David picked the wrong party.
Well, of course, I was brought up in a communist household. My granddad was a hunger marcher.
Yes.
And in fact was blacklisted for 20 years from working. So I sort of come from a left-wing background and a working-class background, but the harsh truth is I will live and die a Tory, I'm afraid.
Roger wants to say, please ask Mr Davis what is the EU and our government views on the power struggle in Ukraine, and also now Russia is involved, says Roger.
You know, I've suddenly begun to feel that it's almost like the 30s again, with all these instabilities, or indeed you've been talking about the First World War.
Yeah, and the lessons learned.
We'll come back to that in a second, but it's quite dangerous if the West play the hand badly. But the trouble is there are not many rights and wrongs in this. You've got big Russian minorities in Ukraine, particularly in Crimea. You've got a massive Russian interest in terms of it's their main warm water port, Sevastopol and Simferopol. And so you've got that. You've also got the fact the Russians are absolutely, forgive my bad language, bloody ruthless when it comes to this sort of thing. They know what they're doing. And I think our main job is just to try to make sure that there are no brutal killings and so on, that actually the sort of balance is handled. Because even the good guys are not heroes in this. It's not quite like Syria, but the big. You remember the big arguments we had about Syria when I opposed the government. In fact, we defeated the government on that. I think you've got to recognise that there are no perfect Democrats in this. This is a tough, secular, divided society in many ways, with history, complicated history that goes back on big international interests, and we do not want to get sucked into it. We absolutely do not want to get sucked into it.
Will we get sucked into it, though?
Well, the European Union will have its say, because it's sort of got its eyes on the Ukraine as a sort of future member, I guess. But, the European Union is not very good at foreign policy, ironically. If you remember, their handling of the Yugoslav crisis was very poor, and arguably made it worse, made the problems in Serbia and so on, and Kosovo worse in the early days. So they're not very good. They've just got to be patient. They've got to encourage democracy, encourage freedom, encourage the rule of law, and try and discourage the Russians from doing anything impetuous. I don't think they will, but I think what you'll see is quite a lot of manoeuvring to make sure the Russians effectively keep control of Crimea. That's the bit on the Black Sea.
David Davis is here. We're going to talk to Sue. Do you want to put those headphones on, David, and then we can hear what Sue's got to say to us? Sue, good morning to you. Where are you?
Good morning. I'm in Hull, East Hull.
All right, what's your question?
Good morning, Sue.
Good morning, Mr Davis. My question is, what is your opinion on fracking?
Well, I think it's a necessity. We have to get cheaper and better energy sources. If we don't, what happens are jobs that get driven abroad. Already we've lost steel capacity, and we've lost chemical capacity to other countries, and we have to find a way of doing it. We should try and do it in a way which doesn't harm individuals, as it were, individuals' interests, and I think that can be done. And bear in mind that what does it do? It actually creates gas or extracts gas from rock.
Yes, but may I interrupt here? It does cut through the water table, and are you not worried about air pollution, soil pollution, water pollution?
No, not generally. I mean, there's been a lot of scare stories about it, and most of them, not all of them, but most of them have turned out to be ill-founded. Now, what it means is when you do something like... when you
have you looked at the Google Maps of Queensland and Texas?
So say again, sorry,
Have you looked at the Google images of Texas and Queensland?
What would I be looking for in those images? No is the answer. What would I be looking for?
Because of what it looks like, all the different wells. A well is only producing for about 2 to 5 years, and then they move on and make another well. And also the drilling causes tremors, earth tremors. That is a known fact. And there's also the dirty water, which they have to get rid of, which in our case, we've got lots of flooding. If that contaminates our drinking water...
Well, that's one of the things where I say there's been little evidence to support the drinking water contamination. In fact, no evidence to support the drinking water contamination argument. The tremors depends on the geology. You've got to make a decision on these things which it takes into account whatever the local circumstance is. Now, if somebody wants to do a great fracking exercise underneath a town, they've got to be very, very, very careful about it. If they're doing it under less inhabited areas and they know what they're doing, then it's not such a problem. Now, understand, hundreds of thousands of jobs and development of the economy depend on us finding a better energy source than we're currently using. And gas will be more efficient from a carbon point of view and from every other point of view, frankly, than using coal and using some of the other sources we're talking about. So broadly speaking, I think it's a good general direction. Like all these things, you've got to be very, very wary of politicians saying, this is fantastic, let's just go do it. You've got to say, OK, let's do it carefully, do it properly, use the planning mechanisms to ensure that people's interests are looked after, and make sure the sorts of things you're worrying about are avoided. Now, in terms of Texas, I mean, Texas is covered in wells, oil wells, gas wells, you name it. I've been there. And so I wouldn't quite use that as an argument. But the other ones, things like, whether there are earth tremors and so on, that's something we have to be prepared to take on, look at, and make sure we don't actually damage people's interest in doing it.
Sue, can I ask you a question? Sue, can I ask you a question? What would reassure you on fracking?
That they stopped it completely, because our country is so small that it's going to... I cannot see a future for it.
All right. Thank you very much for that. It's a good call. I appreciate that. David, in terms of what you see across this area, we supposedly, if you look at the maps that are printed in the newspapers, we're sitting on loads of it. Do you see a big expansion? What will it do for this area? Well,
I would expect... we need to see where the geology works out. I mean, the maps are based on the sort of overall geological structure. But, again, it's a question of doing it intelligently. And if we do it intelligently, protect people's interests, it means a very, very cheap energy source. It means development of new work, new employment, new jobs. I mean, heavens, look, very close to where we are is a constituency which has got 50 unemployed for every one job that's available. We've had this fight. I've had this fight over Brough. I've had this fight over jobs locally. We've got to think about that. We can't just say we can't do anything. And if you took the attitude we can't do anything, you'd end up... Hull would never have been founded,
I will ask you a question on the back of this, but we better do the travel and the weather. The question I'm going to ask, so you've time to ponder it if I want, is what might the impact be of fracking on the wind energy, offshore wind, and the importance there. I'll ask you there and the impact there. That's to come. David Davis is our guest. The MP for Halton, Price and Howden, David Davis, taking your calls, your questions on the Bernsey Show this morning up to 11 o'clock, so don't waste the opportunity. Be in sharp. We just had a good call from Sue on fracking. There might be more debate on that to come. Liz has put in a question about the NHS database and sharing medical records. That's to come. Don't miss out. Let's find out what's happening on the roads of the region. Nick Robbins?
Thank you very much, Bernsey. Well, the A63 westbound, a broken-down van still blocking one lane. It's between Ferriby High Road and the A1034, so it's affecting traffic heading away from Hull towards the M62, so watch out for that lane closure. Doesn't seem to be causing too much disruption, but just something to be aware of if you're out and about today. Now, Beverley Road northbound heading up towards Cottingham Road and Clough Road looking a little bit on the slow side. In fact, southbound too towards the same junction. Watch out for some delays around there. Apart from that, things all moving nicely for the time of day, and the trains are running on time as well. But if you spot anything, call us if it's safe to do so. The number 0330 123 0182. More from us in half an hour.
David Davis, the MP for Halton, Price and Howden, is in the studio this morning, in the hot seat, taking your calls and questions. If you want to talk to David, this is how you do it.
Be part of the David Burns Show. Text 81333 and start your message with RH. Call Hull 225 959. Grimsby 340 959. Email bernsey@bbc.co.uk or tweet the programme at BBC Bernsey.
This is the David Burns Show. May I play you something for the weekend? The question that always starts Friday's Drive Time. An hour of your requests from 4 till 5 and the news from 5. Join me, Andy Comfort, for Drive Time from 4 p.m.
Across northern Lincolnshire and East Yorkshire.
This is BBC Radio Humberside.
In terms of your weather, mostly dry day with variable amounts of cloud and some brighter sunny spells, perhaps staying rather cloudy across Lincolnshire. There might be the odd wintry shower about. Light north or northwesterly breeze. Temperatures 7 degrees Celsius, 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Tonight staying mostly dry into this evening, and maybe a few showers over the hills. There will be some clear spells, which could mean a touch of frost and perhaps a risk of ice. Winds will stay light. Lows around, well, at freezing point, 0 degrees Celsius, 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Tomorrow, it will be a cold start with mist and fog, so watch out if you're going out early driving. Clearing to give a mostly dry and a bright day with scattered wintry showers. Highs of 7 degrees Celsius, 45 degrees Fahrenheit.
Why do folks ask each other, what can I get you for your birthday? What do you buy a couple who appear to have everything for their wedding anniversary? Of course, you can get them a card or a gift voucher, but I have a better idea, as I'll explain during this week's Sunday Request Show. All you need is love, a way of communicating, and a reason. Then problem solved with little expense, but with a priceless personal touch. You'll thank me one day. Perhaps. The Sunday Request Show from midday here on BBC Radio Humberside.
David Davis is here in the studio this morning. On the subject of fracking, sort of an energy sources, will it impact on the provision of offshore wind in this area? Will it have a negative effect?
No, it shouldn't do. I mean, what the government strategy is driven by is diversity in supply of energy. Now, the offshore wind is essentially a heavily subsidised approach, as it should be, but it's a way of making us less reliant on any single source. It's also, of course, low carbon. I'm more concerned about the strategic protection of supply than anything else, so the fracking won't affect the available subsidy. That's what basically Siemens are about at the moment. They're negotiating to get the maximum possible. So.
Where are we at with it? Is it ever going to come? Because frankly, we're in a situation where people think this is never going to come.
Oh, I think it will. I mean, the best expert on this is Alan Johnson, who as you probably know, he and I are unnatural friends in a sense, because we're opposite parties but very good friends, and he's absolutely convinced it will come, and I think he's right, and I think there'll be some haggling between us, competition between governments to try and get it, but I think the government's pretty committed to this, so I think it'll come.
Is it just Siemens playing hardball?
A bit, yeah, of course. It absolutely is that. I mean, and you sort of saw a bit of that with their PR director a week or two ago, saying, if the government doesn't do this, then we won't. Well, that's what they're doing. So it's unsurprising. And, I mean, you've got people like me. I am vehemently against land-based wind farms, but very, very strongly in favour of offshore ones, because I think actually they're much more reliable, they actually work when you need them and so on. So, you've got a pretty wide, broad swathe of political opinion behind it.
How are they in your constituency? Because they are springing up in your constituency.
Oh, they're awful. The place is covered in them.
Yeah. Can you not stop it? Because people don't, by and large, don't want them.
No, they don't want them. And my, in fact, I've just been literally. I was speaking to the Minister of State yesterday, who's another Yorkshireman, about exactly this, that they should be looking hard at the sheer number now. One or two you can understand, but they're going to be people in East Yorkshire, my constituency, where the entire horizon's going to be wind farms, and they came to East Yorkshire, many of them, to have a peaceable, nice, rural environment, not to live in a huge sort of 21st century industrial environment.
So why has it been imposed on them? Why you as an MP and the government not do more about it?
Well, the government's in favour of wind farms. Right. I mean, it's one of the areas where they and I disagree. They're in favour of land-based wind farms, and they view it as a way of cutting carbon emissions. I don't think it works for that purpose. I mean, I think there's a debate as to whether you need to do it quite that way, but they don't work, because for every wind farm you've got to have another power station behind it to cover it when it's not running. I mean, I once had one of the leading engineering advisors to the government say to me, well, the trouble with wind farms is you need the energy round about the beginning of February. That's the peak demand. Why is that? Clear skies, frost, like last night, and look outside, no wind, anticyclonic conditions. So that's one of the reasons wind farms on land don't work. Wind farms offshore, different matter. wind farms on land don't work.
Mr. Spud, and he won't have been christened Mr. Spud, says, ask Mr. Davis about piling in the North Sea. There's noise all night. I've heard this. We got a call earlier in the week about noise off Widensea, where they're piling.
I'm not up on this, I'm afraid.
It's not your constituency, but it will come on the radar. We've had a couple of calls to the station this week about noise.
How far offshore are they?
I'm not sure, but people are hearing it in Widensea.
It must be awful.
Yes. Do let us know.
Yeah.
Liz says, will you please ask David Davis why he objects to medical data leaving the GP practice and put onto a database?
Very much.
It's a very current story we've talked about with yourself on the show before.
Absolutely. I mean, the problem here is you've got a very, very big gain to be had, which is in the research that you can get out of the thing, proving drugs, proving side effects and so on. But on the other hand, you've got the most private data anybody can have about themselves in a huge database. Now, we've had these arguments over ID cards and God knows every other sort of database. If you create a big database like this, what you create, in effect, is a honeypot for people to get into. I mean, let me give you an example. When private detectives are trying to look into allegations about people, the first thing they do is they go and try and they blag their way into the medical database to see if there's been an abortion or sexually transmitted disease or something else. Other aspects of it, mental health issues and so on, people will not want in the public domain. And if we create a huge database without being incredibly careful about it, we will create something which will be very, very damaging to people's privacy. So the way you do it is to make it incredibly closely controlled. You anonymise it, but you can't perfectly anonymise it. I think I said on your programme before. You know, I've had 5 broken noses. You can find me in 5 minutes in the database. You know, so you just got to do it incredibly, incredibly carefully. Lots of security, and also allow people to choose in or out. You know, the government. It's not the government's property. It's your property.
Which way would you go on it? When it comes to you opting in or opting out, what are you going to do?
I'm a public figure, but I will opt out just to make the point, really. I mean, if it was just me, I wouldn't care one way or the other, because everyone knows everything there is to know about me. But I will make a point of opting out just to make sure that the system works, just to test the system, if you like.
Do join in this morning. John wants to talk to David Davis MP. John, good morning to you. Where are you?
Good morning. I'm in Hook, near Gould.
All right. What would you like to ask?
Morning, John.
Good morning, David. I'd like to ask, instead of sending money abroad for aid, why can't we produce the goods in this country and send them goods? And it would create a lot of jobs.
I rather agree with that, but unfortunately it's against international law, believe it or not. You can't use foreign aid, as it were, to help your own trade. It's one of the sort of definitions of foreign aid. You may remember many years ago Douglas Hurd got into trouble because with a court, because he was, I think, giving aid to Malaysia, and we built a dam for them or something. I think we we insisted that we did the work, which is actually what I suspect the French do all the time.
Yes.
And then we got into trouble because it was seen as not to be aid, but almost seen as a sort of bribe. So I have every sympathy with that argument. I happen to think that we should use aid much, much more effectively in our own interest, whether that is improving security, improving relationships. But I mean, another local example, actually, of that going wrong. Do you remember when we were trying to sell hawks to India?
Yes.
And we gave lots of aid to India. And did it help? Not one bit. You know, and I actually don't think we should give aid to India at all. But it didn't help one bit. So I think we should be more subtle about this. I suspect other countries, despite the law, are more subtle about it.
John, that was a question I wouldn't have thought of, frankly, and I didn't know the answer, so good on you.
Aye.
Thank you very much for the question. You happy with the answer?
Except for one thing, I'm sure we could send some goods instead of money.
Well, I wish we could. I mean, you know, there's a different way of doing it, I suspect. What the Americans do, they have their combat, and particularly in sort of war-torn areas, they have their combat engineers go out there, and then, of course, they get support from their own companies, and that's how they do it. So they build bridges, and they lay pipes and so on. But unfortunately, within our legal system, it's much more difficult.
Thanks for your call, John. Appreciate that. Dave Hutchinson says the government sold off British Post Office at a loss to the British public. Where did that money go other than the Treasury? What else was it used for, David Davis?
Well, it goes to the Treasury, exactly. But that is part of... all the Treasury does is run your money, taxpayers' money. And as I was saying before, when we're borrowing 100 billion a year, it reduces the borrowing. That's what it does. It cuts the borrowing. I don't agree with the loss argument. I mean, there is a point here, and that is that when we sell off parts, when we privatise companies, very, very often after it's sold, the share price goes up. But that's happened with virtually every privatisation. Indeed, I tried, when I was Public Accounts Committee Chairman, to get them to sell off in smaller bits. Mm-hmm. So you sell the first bit, then the price goes up, and then you have a market price, then you sell the second bit. But it's very difficult to do. And
was that a scandal? What?
No, it wasn't a scandal.
Was it a waste? Did we get ripped off?
No, but I do think it was probably a little bit of a misjudgment. They aimed a little bit too low. I think it's not as big as people claim, but it
destroys faith, though. I often say on this programme, I wonder whether the people that are doing the calculations in government have the batteries in the calculator, because every sort of public scheme, we get a figure. Yeah. HS2 is an example. We get a figure, and then 10 minutes later, or whatever timescale later, the figure is totally different. Well, what goes on? How can we have any trust?
You want to look at IT projects. You want to see the real runaways. I mean, 30-odd billion at one point lost on IT projects. Look, the government is not, believe it or not. I mean, it's an ironic thing to say, but the government's not actually good at spending your money. Ironically, it's been there. It was my job for 5 years to keep an eye on this as Public Accounts Committee Chairman, and I used to tear my hair out. But the truth is, all you can do is push it back into line. The good thing we have, broadly speaking, which is not unique to Britain, but it's a very, very small number of countries you can say this of, is at least it's straight, at least it's honest. It isn't actually people lining their own pockets broadly. I mean, occasionally it happens, but not broadly.
Just on the subject of post offices, there are a few in some of your constituents, at South Cave, Gilberdyke, Ellerton. People have written to you that the post office is going to be closed. Are you supporting that?
Well, no, the posts are not going to be closed. Right. I mean, that's the sort of the issue.
Rehouse them into convenience stores.
Some of the possibility is rehousing. The biggest issue for this is that people they're afraid of losing services. I mean, this day and age, the more online shopping you do, the more you need parcel services and so on. Mm-hmm. Take South Cave as an example. They were worried that they couldn't get parcels delivered or held at the post office. Now, I actually went to see... I'd summoned the post office managers to come and see me, and they said that this could be dealt with. So I think all these issues can be dealt with, but what needs to happen is the local postmaster or postmistress needs to start the negotiation, and then I can help influence it. But they've got to start the negotiation first.
David Davis is our guest, the MP for Halton, Price and Howden. Do feel free to join in this morning. We've been out and about gathering some questions. Let's start with this one from Michael. We'll find out more.
My name's Michael Brady, and I'm in Cottingham. And I'd just like to know why this area didn't get any money for the floods from Europe.
There was a special European fund allocated for flood money, wasn't there, which seems we haven't applied for.
They said the reason is that the rebate, what Margaret Thatcher got, was the money what we got, if we got some money from the floods, it would be taken from that rebate. But I wouldn't be bothered about that particularly.
David?
Well, what he's talking about is right. That and indeed this was raised in Parliament yesterday by Martin Vickers, another local MP, with Andrew Lansley. And what happens is we get the money with one hand and we give it back with the other. That's really what happens. The rebate gets cut to make up for any claim we take. So we don't get any extra money out of it at the end of the day. The taxpayer gets no extra money. Now, truth be told, I actually don't think we were short of money for flood response, certainly after 2007, which is I think what the biggest thing that the gentleman there was referring to. But the big problem with flood control is not money; it's actually understanding the issue. Because look, you've got 4 different causes of floods. You've got maritime, the big surge we saw. Mm-hmm. You've got rivers overrunning, which we've had in my part of the world. You've got rain, of course, and you've got groundwater. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I'm trying to do is get all our MPs together for the whole area, North and South Bank, and put together a package that we can ask the government to resolve. Now, it's going to cost somewhere north of 200 million, 300 million as a minimum, right? But the problem is, what I want to do is get it all done at once, not as we did in 2007. We did loads of things in 2007, and take a village like Ferriby. We had floods in 2007 from one source. We fixed that, and then on December 5th, another group of houses got flooded because of the water came over the banks. So we're going to have to actually get an integrated approach to it, and the money, the issue will not be about $1 million here, $1 million there. It'll be hundreds of millions. But I think there's no time in my time in Parliament where the government's more likely to pay attention to this than now. So that's why we're doing it.
When will you have that meeting?
Well, the first meeting is being organised between the MPs. That's actually happening. My office is doing it yesterday, today, so it'll be within a couple of weeks. But then we'll take it from there. And I mean, this is not going to be a short-term thing. It's going to take time, because governments don't make the 100 million decisions or multi-100 million decisions quickly. But I'm more optimistic than I would normally be for something as big as this.
Let's get another question. James Pykos out gathering questions for us. This for David Davis.
Tell me your name, sir.
David Bauer.
Hello. What's your point to David Davis?
When is the government going to get the bankers' bonuses sorted out to make it fair? What's the point of having people in Hull having to go to a food bank to eat, and bankers are walking away with millions?
And the point is highlighted by the fact that RBS posted a loss of almost £9 billion this week, yet still managed to allocate almost £500 million in bonus payments.
Precisely.
David?
Yeah, well, I agree. Truth be told, I largely agree. I used to be the chairman of. I was the chairman of the first Future Banking Commission, the Consumer Association funded one back in 2010. And one of the things we said was, the whole incentive scheme is completely out of kilter. Now, the bankers will say to you, oh, well, that's because we have to attract people from abroad to do this. Well, I'm afraid I don't really believe that. The simple truth is that if, the top guy moves, promote somebody. RBS employs tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. You're telling me there's nobody talented in there that won't be happy with his salary, which, after all, will be hundreds of thousands of pounds anyway. Salary most of us will give our arm for.
Yeah, exactly.
So I do think this is problematic. It's partly because we've done something historically which perhaps we shouldn't have done, and that is put together the normal bank, what you and I think of as a bank, a high street bank, with the investment banks, the merchant banks. Now, the high street banks are always, I always talk about it as Captain Mannering banks, if you...
Yes, I've got you, yeah.
And that normal, ordinary, straightforward people, straightforward bank managers know their locale, do the job, lend to small businesses. That's the old conventional model. The merchant bankers come in, big spending, big pay, from New York and Geneva and Hong Kong and so on, and a completely different culture. And back in the 30s, after the Depression, the Americans separated them. It was a thing called the Glass-Steagall Act. And I think we should separate them again. Now, gradually, incredibly gradually, the government's going towards that. I would go faster, but that's what we need to do. Split the banks into ordinary banks and investment banks. And it doesn't matter to us what the investment banks do. And if they go bust, it's not our problem, right? But our banks, the ones we depend on, which the government's got to look after, will then be run more sensibly.
Seems eminently sensible. The final question from the street. This from Derek, I think.
It's Mr. Derek Lake.
Good morning. What would you like to put to David Davis?
I'd just like to ask him when they're going to put an end to this unlimited immigration. They keep promising to limit it, but they're just playing into UKIP hands, which is now the party I will and many others will be voting for.
The Tories should be worried about UKIP?
I think the Tories are very worried about UKIP. Rightly so, because they keep promising to do things and never ever do. Typical politicians.
Why will UKIP get your vote rather than the Conservatives this time?
They've only got one policy, but it's a policy everyone agrees with, and that is to limit or stop immigration.
That's Derek. What do you reckon, David Davis? How would you respond to Derek?
Well, I respond as follows. There are two big sources of immigration. One's Europe, one's outside Europe, right? The outside Europe ones we can pretty much control absolutely if we want to. The inside Europe one, we've got no control over. And the 212,000 net immigration announced yesterday was essentially because loads of people coming here from European countries, particularly coming from the poorer Eastern European countries. Now, when Europe was created, it was created with this freedom of movement idea. Great idea for countries that are, broadly speaking, on a similar level of economic development. People are paid about the same. Doesn't work when a Romanian or a Bulgarian, their average wage is a quarter of our minimum wage. If I were a Romanian, I'd be on the first train, because I'm guaranteed to get more money in Britain than I would get back home. So we need to sort that out. And I'm afraid that's and the other thing that's happened this week is Angela Merkel's come to visit, and it highlights a really, really big issue. We have to, this negotiation with Europe we're going to have in advance of this referendum has got to resolve that issue. If it doesn't resolve that issue, I would put money on us being out of Europe in 10 years.
Right. Okay. It is going to be one of the big election debates, isn't it?
Huge.
Immigration is going to be...
And rightly so. Look, limited immigration is a good thing. It allows us to get talent in. It allows us to meet things that our own people can't do, and so on. But unlimited immigration stresses housing. It stresses social services. You have classes with half the kids not speaking English. That's not fair on either half. And of course, it also depresses wages at the bottom end. You have a minimum wage, but you almost have a maximum wage as well for unskilled workers, and that's not very good either. So it has all sorts of really, really serious ones, but only if it's huge, only if it runs away. If it's down in the 10s and 20s and 30,000s, that's okay. Anybody can manage that.
Is it running away at the moment, do you feel?
Oh, I think it's it's not in control. I think it's not in control. I mean, I'm talking technically, I'm not making a rhetorical point. The simple truth is we are not legally allowed to refuse people access to Britain. Therefore, by definition, we don't control it. And we should be able to. After all, our country is our country. We should be able to determine the culture, the style, the approach, where the pressures fall, and so on, and also delivery of public services, all of which. And it's not a one-way street. I mean, a lot of the health service depends on people coming in.
Yeah, there was a thing on Look North, which I always mention. There were in this area going to Madrid to recruit nurses.
And we've historically recruited from the Indian subcontinent. A lot of the doctors in this part of the world are Indian origin or other Asian origins, so we gain from it too. And the trick is to manage it properly. It's not to sort of take an obsessive no immigration, hate all immigrants type thing. That would be terrible. That wouldn't be our tradition. We've got a fantastic liberal tradition in this country.
Yeah.
Small L liberal, by the way. I'm not.
Yes. I know. I'm with you. Yeah.
But
so when do you feel those controls will come in?
Well, it's got to be a negotiation. It's got to be years. It's got to be years. We can't do it. I mean, if anybody promises you less than years, it's not going to happen. The only way to bring the net down at the moment is to basically shut off half the rest of the world. And remember, we do have traditional links with large parts of the rest of the world outside Europe.
Yeah.
So we don't want to shut them off completely, but that's the only control we really have.
What do you think the biggest issue is going to be in the election next year?
Economy, probably. Jobs, economy. If the government, I mean, we've now got a recovery underway. If that starts to deliver a better standard of living for people looking forward to having decent jobs and so on, then the government, the Tories will win. Not the government, the Tories, not the same. But the Conservatives will win. If we don't get that, if it doesn't run out, it'd be much, much tougher.
Is that not also the Achilles heel, though? Because the other side of the coin, we seem to be increasingly in a more sort of divided society. We hear about food banks all the time on the radio and the papers and things like that. Are we leaving... Are your government, your party, not caring enough about people at the margins? The bedroom tax and the so-called bedroom tax and everything like that has brought sort of adverse publicity and made a real horrible impact on people's lives.
It's an easy divide, but it's not true. I mean, look, the simple truth is, what's one of the biggest things that this government has done? Now, both sides try and claim credit, but the taking a large number of people out of tax is a fantastic thing to do, because it means people can help themselves, they can go and get a job, they're not stuck in dependency, and they get their way out of poverty. I mean, we started out talking about my communist background, growing up in on a council estate and in a prefab, and the great way out of that was actually to work your own way out of it, if you could, not be stuck in dependency. And I am acutely conscious of that. I can't go through a council estate without remembering my own background, and the way to and they're good council estates, by the way. But the way to get out of poverty is to be able to work your way out of it, and the government should help in that in every respect.
Thank you very much for your time this morning. I've enjoyed it. I'm sure people have as well. We will hopefully see you again. Do join us again on the programme. David Davis, our guest on the show this morning. Thank you to him for his time. There's plenty more to come on the programme. Anything you've heard on the programme